Originali.
La penna di Kazuo Ishiguro, la voce di Marco Piovazza. A Lingue Originali, nella puntata settimanale dedicata alla letteratura in lingua inglese, dalla precedente occasione stiamo leggendo per voi il primo capitolo di Quel che resta del giorno, titolo originale The Remains of the Day, dal quale, come spesso accade per le grandi opere letterarie, è stato tratto nel 1993 l'omonimo film. Il regista, il grande James Ivory. La storia viene raccontata nel 1956, siamo a Darlington Hill, dal protagonista James Stevens, il quale durante un viaggio ripercorre, facendo un bilancio, come facciamo tutti quanti noi a un certo punto della nostra vita, i momenti più significativi della sua. Quel che resta del giorno, The Remains of the Day. L'episodio precedente, quello nel quale abbiamo letto la prima parte del primo capitolo, dove l'aveste perso, lo trovate su Spotify, su tutte le piattaforme di podcasting e sul canale YouTube, dove c'è un'apposita playlist dedicata a tutte le 3 puntate della settimana di Lingue Originali. Troverete nella descrizione di questo episodio il link. E allora, in lingua inglese, dalla voce di Marco Piovazza, continuiamo a leggere il primo capitolo di Quel che resta del giorno, The Remains of the Day, di Kazuo Ishiguro. Buon ascolto.
Now, naturally, like many of us, I have a reluctance to change too much of the old ways. But there is no virtue at all in clinging, as some do, to tradition merely for its own sake. In this age of electricity and modern heating systems, there is no need at all to employ the sorts of numbers necessary even a generation ago. Indeed, it has actually been an idea of mine for some time that the retaining of unnecessary numbers simply for tradition's sake, resulting in employees having an unhealthy amount of time on their hands, has been an important factor in the sharp decline of professional standards. Furthermore, Mr. Faraday had made it clear that he planned to hold only very rarely the sort of large social occasions Darlington Hall had seen frequently in the past. I did then go about the task Mr. Faraday has set me with some dedication. I spent many hours working on the staff plan, and at least as many hours again thinking about it as I went about other duties or as I lay awake after retiring. Whenever I believed I had come up with something, I probed it for every sort of oversight, tested it through from all angles. Finally, I came up with a plan, which, while perhaps not exactly as Mr. Faraday's had requested, was the best, I felt sure, that was humanly possible. Almost all the attractive parts of the house could remain operative. The extensive servants' quarters, including the back corridor, the 2 still rooms and the old laundry, and the guest corridor up the second floor, would be dust-sheeted, leaving all the main ground floor rooms and generous number of guest rooms. Admittedly, our present team of 4 would manage this program only with reinforcement from some daily workers. My staff plan, therefore, took in the services of a gardener to visit once a week, twice in the summer, and 2 cleaners, each to visit twice a week. The staff plan would furthermore, for each of the 4 resident employees, mean a radical altering of our respective customary duties. The 2 young girls, I predicted, would not find such changes so difficult to accommodate, but I did all I could to see that Mrs. Clements suffered the least adjustments, to the extent that I undertook for myself a number of duties which you may consider most broad-minded of a butler to do. Even now, I would not go so far as to say it is a bad staff plan. After all, it enables a staff of 4 to cover an unexpected amount of ground. But you will no doubt agree that the very best staff plans are those which gave clear margins of error to allow for those days when an employee is ill or for one reason or another below par. In this particular case, of course, I had been set a slightly extraordinary task, but I had nevertheless not been neglectful to incorporate margins wherever possible. I was especially conscious that any resistance there may be on the part of Mrs. Clements or the two girls to the taking on of duties beyond their traditional boundaries would be compounded by any notion that their workloads had greatly increased. I had then, over those days of struggling with the staff plan, expended a significant amount of thought to ensuring that Mrs. Clements and the girls, once they had got over their aversion to adopting these more eclectic roles, would find the division of duties stimulated and unburdensome. I fear, however, that in my anxiety to win the support of Mrs. Clements and the girls, I did not perhaps assess quite as stringently my own limitations, and although my experience and customary caution in such matters prevented my giving myself more than I could actually carry out, I was perhaps negligent over this question of allowing myself a margin. It is not surprising, then, if over several months this oversight should reveal itself in these small but telling ways. In the end, I believe the matter to be no more complicated than this. I had given myself too much to do. You may be amazed that such an obvious shortcoming to a staff plan should have continued to escape my notice. But then you will agree that such is often the way with matters one has given abiding thought to over a period of time. One is not struck by the truth until prompted quite accidentally by some external event. So it was in this instance, that is to say, my receiving the letter from Miss Kenton, containing as it did, along with its long, rather unrevealing passages, an unmistakable nostalgia for Darlington Hall, and I am quite sure of this, distinct hints of her desire to return here, obliged me to see my staff plan afresh. Only then did it strike me that there was indeed a role that a further staff member could crucially play here, that it was, in fact, this very shortage that had been at the heart of my recent troubles. And the more I considered it, the more obvious it became that Miss Kenton, with her great affection for this house, with her exemplary professionalism, the sort almost impossible to find nowadays, was just the factor needed to enable me to complete a fully satisfactory staff plan for Darlington Hall. Having made such an analysis of the situation, it was not long before I found myself reconsidering Mr. Faraday's kind suggestion of some days ago, for it had occurred to me that the proposed trip in the car could be put to a good professional use. That is to say, I could drive to the West Country and call on Miss Kenton in passing, thus exploring at first hand the substance of her wish to return to employment here at Darlington Hall. I have, I should make clear, reread Miss Kenton's recent letter several times, and there is no possibility I am merely imagining the presence of these hints on her part. For all that, I could not for some days quite bring myself to raise the matter again with Mr. Faraday. There were, in any case, various aspects to the matter I felt I needed to clarify to myself before proceeding further. There was, for instance, the question of cost. For even taking into account my employer's generous offer to foot the bill for the gas, the cost of such a trip might still come to a surprising amount, considering such matters as accommodation, meals, and any small snacks I might partake of on my way. Then there was the question of what sort of costume were appropriate on such a journey, and whether or not it was worth my while to invest in a new set of clothes. I am in the possession of a number of splendid suits, kindly passed on to me over the years by Lord Darlington himself, and by various guests who have stayed in this house and had reason to be pleased with the standard of service here. Many of these suits are perhaps too formal for the purposes of the proposed trip, or else rather old-fashioned these days. But then there is one lounge suit passed on to me in 1931 or 32 by Sir Edward Blair, practically brand new at the time and almost a perfect fit, which might well be appropriate for evenings in the lounge or dining room of any guest houses where I might lodge. What I do not possess, however, is any suitable travelling clothes. That is to say, clothes which I might be seen driving the car, unless I were to don the suit passed on by the young Lord Chalmers during the war, which, despite being clearly too small for me, might be considered ideal in terms of tone. I calculated finally that my savings would be able to meet all the costs I might incur, and in addition might stretch to the purchase of a new costume. I hope you do not think me unduly vain with regard to this latter matter. It is just that one never knows when one might be obliged to give out that one is from Darlington Hall, and it is important that one be attired at such times in a manner worthy of one's position. During this time I also spent many minutes examining the road atlas and perusing also the relevant volumes of Mrs. Jane Simon's The Wonder of England. If you're not familiar with Mrs. Simon's books, a series running to 7 volumes, each one concentrating on one region of the British Isles, I heartily recommend them. They were written during the 30s, but much of it would still be up to date. After all, I do not imagine German bombs have altered our countryside so significantly. Mrs. Simons was, as a matter of fact, a frequent visitor to this house before the war. Indeed, she was among the most popular as far as the staff were concerned, due to the kind appreciation she never shielded from showing. It was in those days, then, prompted by my natural admiration for the lady, that I had first taken to perusing her volumes in the library whenever I had an odd moment. Indeed, I recall that shortly after Miss Kenton's departure to Cornwall in 1936, myself never having been to that part of the country, I would often glance through volume 3 of Mrs. Simon's work, the volume which describes to readers the delights of Devon and Cornwall, complete with photographs, and to my mind even more evocative, a variety of artists' sketches of that region. It was thus that I had been able to gain some sense of the sort of place Miss Kenton had gone to leave her married life. But this was, as I say, back in the 30s, when, as I understand, Mrs. Simon's books were being admired in houses up and down the country. I had not looked through those volumes for many years, until these recent developments led me to get down from the shelf the Devon and Cornwall volume once more. I studied all over again those marvellous descriptions and illustrations, and you can perhaps understand my growing excitement at the notion that I might now actually undertake a motoring trip myself around that same part of the country.
Lingue originali.